Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. Quotations are more memorable and hence often more helpful than a tome would be. And in an attempt to reduce quotations' necessary reductionism, here I'm offering a yes and or a yes but for these quotations from some eminent people. We'll start with Eleanor Roosevelt, stateswoman. She writes, "My experience has been that work is almost the best way to pull oneself out of the depths." I wonder about the almost. What might she have found a better way? A hobby? Sex? Pride in her husband, FDR? Or kids? Next, let's turn to Ray Bradbury, famous fiction writer. He writes, "If you don't love something, then don't do it." End quote. Well, alas, few people can afford to hold out for a career that they love. For most people, the compensation, or the money, and the work itself has to be the reward. Next, Stevie Wonder, the singer. "You gots to work with what you gots to work with." Well, that implies you can't grow. Well, we can. Indeed, I would imagine that even the talented Stevie Wonder worked to improve rather than just work with what you gots, if only to learn the business side of music, so to help ensure that he got a fair deal. Next, Frederico Fellini, the filmmaker. He writes, "It is only when I'm doing my work that I feel truly alive." Yeah, but few careers are as impactful and creative as being a major filmmaker. Normal people shouldn't feel that work will be the only time they can feel, quote, truly alive. Many people feel alive in, for example, relationships, volunteering, creative outlets, sports. Next, Kenman Wilson. He is the Kenman's Wilson. He is the CEO, or was the CEO of Holiday Inns. He wrote, "I like to work half a day. I don't care if it's the first 12 hours or the second. I just put in my half every day. Keeps me out of trouble." End quote. Yes, whether with kids or adults, I have found wisdom in Wilson's statement and in the related biblical proverb, "Idle hands are the devil's workshop." That said, I have had some clients who just can't motivate themselves, even with coaching, to work more than a very modest amount despite feeling that they should. P.S. Despite working those long hours, Wilson lived to age 90. Next, James Cash Penney, the founder of J.C. Penney's. He writes, "The greatest teacher I know is the job itself." Yes, many people find that they learn more outside of school than in. For example, former Chief Justice Lewis Powell's law firm mainly hires graduates of prestigious law schools, and yet requires them to undergo a long on-the-job training program. And personally speaking, I feel I learned more about counseling from experience than from my PhD. And when I began hosting a radio show, I asked my highly respected manager for advice on how to get better, and his answer was, mainly it comes with experience. Now let's turn to Pope Paul VI. Quote, "The very striving and hard work that we so constantly try to avoid is the major building block in the person we are today." End quote. I'm actually surprised that a pope would say that. I would have expected a pope to believe that a, quote, major building block in the person we are today isn't work, but love and kindness. Next, George Bernard Shaw, the playwright and activist. He writes, "When I was a young man, I observed that 9 of the 10 things I did were failures. I didn't want to be a failure, so I did 10 times more work." But to quote Emerson, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." Or, as expressed in that song, The Gambler, you got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em. Next, Henry David Thoreau, the philosopher. He writes, "Do not hire a man who does your work for money, but for love of it." That's the ideal, and you may increase your chances of finding such a person by asking the candidate to describe in detail how he or she approached a recent project or two. Next, Dylan Thomas, the poet. Quote, "He who seeks rest finds boredom. He who seeks work finds rest." Yes, hard workers are more likely to put their head on the pillow feeling they've earned a good rest, and thus are more likely to have a good rest. Louis Fisher, biographer. He writes, "St. Francis of Assisi was hoeing his garden when someone asked what he would do if he were suddenly to learn he would die before sunset that day. St. Francis replied, 'I would finish hoeing my garden.'" I'll just add to that, me too. I am honored that the Inspiring Quotations website includes roughly 100 quotes by me, and here is one that I quite like, yet still warrants a yes but. The quote is, "If your self-esteem is low, Perhaps focus on finding work you can succeed at. Real self-esteem comes from accomplishment, end quote. Yeah, but unfair critics of a person, especially if they're family members, can erode a person's earned self-esteem. In any event, might one of these quotes or its associated commentary improve your life? In any event, I do thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nemko. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments. And I really like it if you hit the share button below, because that way, and share it with your social media, because that way my efforts can have broader impact. And of course, I'm flattered if you would subscribe to my channel. And in any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.